Welcome back to GaleForceWins Season 2.
The GaleForceWins podcast is proudly sponsored by Newfound Marketing, a digital marketing agency located in St. John's, Newfoundland. Visit our website at newfoundmarketing.ca to find out how we can help your business grow. Newfound Marketing, a complement to your marketing team.
Well, welcome to another edition of GaleForceWins. I'm Alan Dale. With us always is my good buddy from the East End of St. John's. Jerry, how you making out?
Well, we've done probably, about 150 in-person interviews. It's despite this being our roots, doing it digitally, it's kind of weird to be back on a digital platform. That being said, it actually facilitates our conversation with Eric really well, and I'm really looking forward to talking about Eric and his journey.
Yeah, it is. You know what? It's actually kind of refreshing to be back on Zoom. It's somewhat comfortable.
That's just because you don't want to be in my presence too much.
I don't know if it's so much that or if it's humping our audio visual gear all around the world that makes Zoom a little bit more comfortable. All you got to do is go upstairs in your house, or in your case, Jerry, in your basement. Enough about us, enough about Zoom. Listen, Eric, real pleasure to have you on the podcast. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so the pleasure's all mine to be here today. I'm Eric James. I originally grew up in a very small town in Northern Ontario called New Liskeard, which for those of you who don't know Ontario very well is about an hour and a half north of North Bay. So if you're north of a town called North Bay, it must be pretty high up there. It's north, exactly, yeah. I grew up there till about grade 8 when my parents moved down to Windsor, Ontario. My father works for Chrysler in the auto plants there. And that's really where I got interested in joining the Navy, because Windsor, Ontario has HMCS Hunter. And I remember it was in my first year of moving down there that I saw the Hunterites, as they like to call themselves, on parade during a Remembrance Day ceremony, and kind of piqued my interest, because you don't think about the Navy too much when you live in central Ontario because you're so landlocked. But of course, that's the mission of the Naval Reserves there, to bring the Navy into the vast land that stretches our country, and it affected me. That PR strategy kind of worked, and I ended up joining HMCS Hunter when I was 18 years old in my first year of university. It was a mix of obviously my desire to serve the country and be a member of the military in some way, but also had a practical side to it in that I needed to pay for my education. It kind of came to a head in looking for work. And the Naval Reserves was there. And luckily, the recruiting center was very keen on jumping in on that. I remember walking in and saying, I want to be a pilot at first, actually. An Air Force pilot was what it was. I think we all started as Mars officers as wanting to be Air Force pilots. And the recruiter said to me, well, unfortunately, I've recruited my max quota this year for that, but how would you like to be a pilot of the sea? And once they found out that I was in university, he directed me to the Naval Reserve, saying, you'll get summer employment, you can work part-time during your university, and you can complete your studies. Obviously, coming from a working class family, we didn't have a lot of savings for me to go to school, so the Navy really filled that gap, and I've always been very grateful for that. And after completing my training, I fell in love with the West Coast. That's where I did my basic training and obviously my Mars training, and absolutely loved it, and couldn't get over the ocean and the mountains, which again are things that aren't in landlocked Ontario. And ended up working as a full-time out here. They called them the Permashads. I was on the kind of last vanguard of the Permashads before the Navy corrected that setup. And I worked my way up from a deck officer through navigation officer to an operations officer, and a short stint as an acting executive officer on the Kingston class vessels, the minor war vessels, before I was eventually diagnosed with kidney failure in the summer of 2017.
Wow. What a journey already, Eric. That's incredible. So north of North Bay, Liskeard, Ontario, all the way down to what I like to call South Detroit down there in Windsor. Hunter, great unit, no doubt about it. Hunter has produced some of the best sailors this Navy has ever seen. And by the sounds of your career path, you were just one of those in the mix.
Yeah, their motto is ready, run required. And I certainly internalized that and stepped up when the time came. Yeah.
Yeah. So Eric,
Just don't come to us when we're not.
You fell in love with the West Coast, eh? Tell me about that love affair, because it's pretty easy to fall in love with the West Coast.
It's very easy to fall in love with the West Coast, although she pushes back a little bit with the cost of things out here. But it was the ocean. First of all, just being down on the boats and coming down to work on a jetty. It was just so foreign to me. I remember the tides lesson in my Mars 3 program and just being like, oh, wait a minute, that's right. Oceans have tides. Like the oceans move back and forth. And the East Coasters are saying, oh, silly boy, like you just don't understand how this works here. But so it was just fascinating. And then, of course, the mountains. So while you're not playing on the sea and working in the Navy, you're spending your time hiking and exploring the mountains and the beautiful nature and landscape that's out here. So I find it very similar to Northern Ontario out here. The difference is, there's work, obviously, for people, and things are bigger. So rather than having many lakes, you have oceans and inlets. And rather than having the hills and the shield that's up in the northern part of Canada, you have mountains now that kind of replace them. So things are just a bit bigger, but it certainly feels a lot like Northern Ontario.
Eric, navigating around those islands in and around Victoria and in Vancouver and sort of up towards Alaska, quite something, isn't it?
It's breathtaking. When I was navigating officer, I was able to go through Renal Narrows just up in Alaska. I mean, these were moments of my life that I'll never get back. I remember too on Mars 4 during the sea phase, navigating into San Francisco Harbor, taking fixes off the Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz Island, and just thinking, here's little old me from Northern Ontario, where I saw these images on TV and never in a million years would think that I would be here. And yet I'm actually getting an opportunity to sail into the harbor with one of the San Francisco bar pilots on board, the most famous pilots in the world. And again, taking those fixes, seeing those views, it was just absolutely spectacular.
It's pretty remarkable what the Navy offers you, and they kind of consider it work. I don't know about you, but when I was doing those things and when Jerry was doing those things on the West Coast, it just didn't seem like work.
It's not work. I think the people who consider it work are the civilians who work in D&D. To them, what we do is work, but to all of us, we're doing what we love at the end of the day, and that's first and foremost. And when I actually was medically released, the joke was, it's time to grow up now. It's time to grow up and get a real job, right? And so it never felt like work, certainly, especially as a Mars officer when your office is the bridge of a warship. Like it's never, ever felt like work.
And you say you had a short stint as the second in command of one of those warships. That must have been amazing.
It was. So when I first joined the Navy, I had in my mind that it was going to be a short-term thing, that I was just going to put some time in, get through school, and eventually I'd get out. I remember doing my training and being told that every Mars officer should aspire for command. And you kind of just put it in the back of your head and say, well, no, that's a tough job. I just want to drive this thing, not have to worry about it 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. As you work your way through and you develop more of your own leadership style and your own approach to what would eventually become command, or have your ideas of what, you kind of drink the Kool-Aid. And I did. And I started jumping with 2 feet into developing for command. I was very fortunate to have a captain near the end of my career, Lieutenant Commander Thompson Greif, who's now a Reg Force officer. I believe he's Lieutenant Thompson Greif now. But he was the CO of HMCS Yellowknife. And there was a gap in filling for the XO position, and knowing that I was on the way out at that point and my aspirations for command were coming to an end, he gave me an opportunity to at least consolidate and in it a chance to take that role at sea and to see what it was like. So I did get to do, it was a 3-month sail with the ship as the acting XO, and he really put me through the paces to show me what it was going to be like. And I enjoyed that. It was a bittersweet, actually, is what it was, because I realized that I really enjoyed it. I would have liked to have entered into that phase of my career as a Mars officer, but unfortunately, it just wasn't in the cards at the end of the day. So I remained a company man in the Navy for my career, and that's just what it is, I guess, now.
Eric, it's one thing to drive one of those ships and be on board and the scenery and everything that it is to be on a Canadian warship. But I think the most spectacular, oh my God, spectacular part of it all is the people that you work with. And tell me about, as an XO, what those sailors meant to you.
Well, right from the day I was a deck officer, it didn't take being XO to internalize and understand what my role was as an officer. I absolutely loved meeting people from all across Canada. And that's something that benefits me even today. I still say that the most tolerant and accepting and welcoming workplace that I've ever worked in, or even in my school environment now, has been in the Navy. We're so many people from so many backgrounds that represent the diversity of Canada come together. And as an officer, you're their leader. You're the person that they look to for guidance and direction. You know, we tend to think traditionally in the sense of the discipline and the stuff, but it wasn't just that. I was their representative. I was their representative to command, and I made sure that their voices were heard and that their needs were taken into consideration in the ship. And that was certainly something I internalized. I was, again, very fortunate to have very good senior NCOs who took me under their wings early as a junior officer and gave me that development and taught me the importance of that on the deck leadership, feet on the deck leadership, not these theoretical concepts and all these fanciful ideas. You know, when you ask your guys to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a transit through a Narrows and they have to close up cable party, that you're up as well. You're there with those boys and you're out there and you're showing them that if I'm going to ask you to do this too, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. So the people were the biggest part about that. I miss in particular the mids. When you'd have those conversations, you'd share your stories of your life, where you came from, what your interests were, right? Those were kind of those times, and you get to know your people. And I haven't had a workplace or even in school with a connection to that level that I had with those people in the Navy.
You got to get a job where you work from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. every day.
Yeah, really get to know somebody.
That's for our audience that don't know what the mids are. That's a watch in the naval watch rotation that runs from 12 midnight until 4 a.m. in the morning. And quite honestly, it's a great watch, isn't it, Eric? It allows you time to have conversations with people from all across this great country, learn about them, and as a leader, like you were, understand them and understand the complexities of their lives and what was bothering them so that you could be a better leader, and you take that time to learn about them from 12 to 4.
That's it. The hour of power, we used to call it. It said, if you can't see your face, then you can gripe a little bit because I don't know who it is who's coming forward with it. So usually things are obviously a little quieter at midnight with the rest of the ship sailing. It's very difficult to do that during the day when you have your full program and things going on. So
I'll tell you a funny mid-watch story. When I was on Athabascan some years ago, we used to have this game of who could make the best coffee on the middle watch, and we'd take turns. And back in those days, there was 14 of us on watch on the bridge. Not the case on a ship that you were on, but there was 14 of us. So we took turns making coffee. They go down, and this one leading seaman, I think he was from Rimouski or someplace like that. Man, he made one heck of a cup of coffee, and I want to tell you. So at the end of it, when we asked him what was in it, he said Bailey's. Wasn't the best move to be serving Bailey's while we're on watch, but he didn't know, and it was all good. So we made it through. Eric, you talk a little bit about your academic journey. What was that like for you, and what is it like now?
So I was the first person in my family to go to university. And like I said, coming from a working class background, it's not like my father had a bunch of money to give me to go to school. So the Navy was there for that. I was able to work during the summer times doing my training. It was great because while the rest of my friends were struggling in university to find that part-time job, which usually ended up planting trees someplace in the middle of nowhere, which I hear is an absolutely terrible experience. I always knew what was going to happen, right? I always knew that as soon as exams were done, I was going to throw in the uniform, pack that green bag, and head across the country to do my training. And the load that takes off you as a student is just remarkable. And then obviously during the school year, I had part-time work at a Hunter. So
what were you studying?
Political science at the University of Windsor. Yeah. And then now that I've been medically released, there's a slew of benefits for obviously reintegration back into the civilian workforce since I've never actually been in it to begin with. I always just went straight into the military after I had finished school. But the Veterans Affairs and D&D both have programs for that. So I've returned back to school to college now to get a digital production certificate. The silver lining that I see in having to leave the military and not do what would be my first love is I decided to pursue something that was a passion of mine in photography and video work. So my time in the military isn't quite being wasted. It's allowing me now to pursue this in my civilian life.
Wow. What a beautiful journey all around. You, Jerry, did you want to quickly geek out on video work here before?
Yes, I do. It's funny, I started very early on to do videos, and I shot wedding videos. Started in 1988, long before you were born, I'm sure, Eric. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about the program and what it is about the whole photography and video that you really like.
Yeah, so digital production is the fastest growing industry right now in British Columbia, specifically on Vancouver Island. There's such a vast amount of work that's available there, whether it's working for the government and doing public relations. Most companies now have some type of social media coordinator or some type of digital producer that's producing content that you see every day. I mean, that content has to come from somebody, the stuff that you're seeing on your social media feeds and things like that. So the program really zeroes in with a hands-on approach of doing the photography to gather that kind of material, to do the video work, to develop those short videos or that material that you see, and also graphic design and a portion of writing, persuasive writing. So it really encompasses that broad approach and sets you up for success to be able to work for a company and be a social media coordinator. Where I got the taste for that was actually being the public affairs officer for the ship as a secondary duty. So I ran the social media feed for the ship, and we'd also write the bios that would get sent to the newspapers back home on the sailors. So that gave me a taste for kind of what it was like. But I've always been interested in photography. Photography is a huge passion of mine. Outside of work, it's just a side kind of thing. And looking to formalize it, I guess, right now a little bit. So the program ends up, you get certificates in being able to use the Adobe suites, which is the industry standard in that. So, yeah.
Wow. What do you think of that, Jerry?
Alan, you and I have encountered a lot of people over the last couple of years since we started GaleForceWins. I can tell you this, Eric, that the skills that you're studying right now are incredibly in demand, as you know. And there's quite a gap in terms of the qualifications. People come out of the business program in universities. They don't necessarily know how to execute. They know some of the strategy, but then when they get into a company and they're thrown into, put up Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that, it can be pretty overwhelming. So it's really cool to hear that this is something that you've chosen, and I understand it.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I worked for a local candidate in Victoria who was running for office in the elections that just happened here. And very competent. She's a business person. Her husband's a lawyer. They're very well organized. She had a great campaign. She was recording her videos on her iPhone with her hand, the wind's blowing, all that going on. Yeah. She's making her graphics using Paint and using PowerPoint. And I said, I can help you out here. I can do this. So you're exactly right. You have these people who they're very knowledgeable people. They're very good, but just a complete misunderstanding of the work. I always say, respect the craft, the work that kind of goes into producing this digital content.
Hey, Eric, did she win?
No, she didn't, unfortunately. Yeah. But I was just responsible for putting the graphics and stuff together. It was her campaign. I
couldn't be the digital content.
No, the digital content looked great. That was certainly something that was observed during the campaign.
Good. Eric, you mentioned a number of times that you were medically released from the Navy. Let's explore that a little bit. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so summer of 2017. This is again. I was actually the operations officer on board Yellowknife, and I had a string of a few weeks where I didn't feel very well. Felt like I was getting sick. I felt like I was losing a lot of energy. And at first, you don't think about these things. You chalk it up to just being sick or catching a bug or something, which isn't uncommon on the ships either. We know that sometimes those things kind of go around. You're working in close proximity. I was also lucky because I was a senior officer, so no one was making me march to sick grade every morning that I said I wasn't feeling too well. I could just phone it in and carry on with my day. After a few weeks of doing this on and off, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go to sick bay because I don't want them to think that I'm pulling their leg here and creating a problem. So I went to sick bay, and I'll never forget the look of the doctor when she took my blood pressure, and it was just through the roof. And right away I knew I knew that kidney failure was in my family. I thought that maybe I was out of the woods a bit, that I'd become old enough and it had gone past me. But as soon as she said my blood pressure was high, my mind went right there. And we took blood tests, and it was confirmed later on that afternoon that there was indeed a problem with my kidneys. So I was then handed over to the civilian medical community, because the military medical community can only go so far with a lot of that stuff. And then, after a round of tests, it was confirmed that my kidneys at that point hadn't failed to the point of requiring dialysis, but were failing to the point that I was now showing symptoms in my own body, requiring medical intervention to bring down that blood pressure, and then regular blood testing to track the progress as they declined. So,
And you say that you kind of suspected because it was in your family at that point?
Yeah, kidney disease is very pervasive in my family. In our memory of my family, it goes back to my great-grandfather, who died of it in the 50s. My grandmother had it all through my life growing up. My mother had it again. She had a transplant for 20 years. So one half of my life was with my mother on dialysis. The second half of my life was with my mother having a kidney transplant and living a relatively normal life for the most part. And then my brother was diagnosed 5 years before I was. He was on the machine. So we both got caught, my brother and I, as a generation of my mother. So it's still very much present in our family. It's something that has always been present in the family.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about the disease. Explain it to us, and for the audience that don't understand it fully.
Yeah, so we don't know the cause of it, and there really isn't much of an interest in knowing that. That's one thing that my nephrologist explained to me, and my kidney specialist, when I started down the journey. Because we know that dialysis and the transplant is the solution, there are a few genetic conditions that will eventually lead to kidney failure, but there's no interest in really getting down into what causes it. The solution is a new kidney. So it's that hereditary condition. We used to think that you would know by the age of 25. That seemed to have been the average when people were finding out. But now, like, I was 30 years old when I found out. I had an uncle who was in his 40s who found out shortly after me. So there doesn't seem to be a timeline on it. Obviously, your kidneys fail. So you have what's called a GFR. It's a filtration rate. That's how they measure the function of your kidneys. And people with a GFR of 10, that's what they usually say, or below, that's when you required stage 4 kidney failure. That's when you would require the intervention of the kidney machine. What's interesting is that kidney failure actually affects 1 in 5 Canadians, so about 20% of the population. And most people, about 90% of those people, will live their whole lives without being aware that their kidneys are on a scale of failure, because they don't get to the point that they start showing physical symptoms. And also, too, just a normal healthy person, throughout periods of your life, your kidney fluctuates in its effectiveness. So some of those sailors coming back after their rig runs ashore, the next day there is a drop in kidney function. A pregnant woman, for example, too, will often have kidney failure during a pregnancy because of the stress that's put on it. So they're very interesting organs in that sense. They call them the canary in the coal mine. They're usually the first ones to show signs that there's issues going on in your body in some sort. So when they start to fail, what you lose is filtration of your blood. There's a lot of toxins that build up in your blood, specifically potassium and phosphorus, that build up through the foods that you consume on a regular basis. And the kidneys play a huge role. Well, they are the central role in filtering out those toxins and also removing fluid from your blood, which is what produces urine to your bladder, which is what everyone kind of understands what the kidneys do. But maintaining that fluid in your blood is also what maintains your blood pressure. It's not your heart that maintains blood pressure. It's just your heart that's affected by the pressure that it's pumping. It's your kidneys that play that role in saying, pull more fluid if the blood pressure is high, or add more if it's low to increase that pressure. And the kidneys also play a huge role in red blood cell production. So just making the blood itself, the kidneys are the ones that send the signals to your bone marrow to begin doing that. So there's a whole whack of things that the kidneys do to maintain homeostasis. And when you remove their function, it greatly affects your body, and you start to show symptoms pretty quickly.
Eric, you talk about medical intervention. What exactly is that?
So for me, it's right now, blood pressure is a huge piece, maintaining the blood pressure. There's a whole whack of medical issues that come on when you're not maintaining your blood pressure. And now the dialysis is probably the most significant medical intervention in my life. So 3 times a week, I go to the dialysis unit here in Victoria, and I receive life-giving treatment. I'm hooked up to a machine, and my blood is run through a filter to filter out the potassium and the phosphorus and the toxins, and also the fluid that's in my blood. So I'm on a fluid restriction between runs, because every drop of fluid that I consume, even including the moisture that's just in my food, stays in my body. I don't urinate like a normal person does anymore, because I don't have an organ that produces that urine anymore. So I have to monitor my fluids, and during my runs, that fluid is then pulled off my body. So I literally come in a few kilos overweight before my run, and after 4 hours, or I do 8-hour runs, but after my run, I'm a few kilos lighter because that fluid has come off of my body during that run.
Wow.
Eric, you just said you do an 8-hour dialysis?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. So the standard in the community is a 3-hour or 3 runs, 4 hours during the week. And those are during the daytime, because that's when the unit runs. In Victoria, there's really good funding in place. We have a really good doctor who's in charge of the program. We have a nocturnal program in Victoria, which allows me to still have my working day and somewhat of a life. So I go into the hospital still 3 times a week, but they're for 8 hours. They're longer runs, which is more gentler on my body. They can run a lower pump speed on the machine itself, and also just a longer run for a better clean. But I sleep at the hospital. I set up my bed in a little pod area and a little quiet area, and I sleep for those 8 hours. So it impacts my life a little bit less. But something about dialysis that a lot of people don't understand is I don't feel better after dialysis. It's not like I go in not feeling well and then I come out wanting to click my heels and do a cartwheel. You feel okay. You feel returned to maybe what is a state of normal, which is not really what normal is for a healthy person. And then some days you feel like absolute garbage, and you're just grateful that you at least have the next 2 days, because otherwise, I'm the walking dead otherwise, if it wasn't for that machine. So it still has an impact on your life, even though I'm able to do it at night and sleep there.
You describe it so so easy and gently, and how appreciative you are. It's a big impact on your life. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing it for 5 years now. So since 2018 is when I started. I'm in my 5th year now doing dialysis.
5 years, every or 3 times a week, going into the hospital, sleeping there to have your blood filtered.
That's it. Yeah. Blood filtered and fluid removed. Yeah. Is
there another solution, Eric?
There's other forms of dialysis that are available to me. There's peritoneal dialysis. But really the gold-plated solution when it comes to organ failure is a transplant. So that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What does that look like?
So there's 2 avenues for a transplant. You get put on the provincial list. This is what most people are aware of when it comes to organ transplantation. So you're put on the list based on your need, based on your condition. You're obviously placed at a certain point in that list. And then you're just waiting. You're waiting for someone who has filled out their donor card, who has said that I'm willing to give my organs if I pass away. And you're hoping that eventually you get the call that you match that person and their organs. That time that you spend on that list is largely driven by the blood type that you have. My blood type is B positive, It's one of the most rare in the country. It's about 5% of the population. So the wait times are the longest. It's about 5 to 7 year wait time in British Columbia for organ transplant for a B positive blood type. The second venue or vector for getting an organ is a live donor. So this is where someone steps forward and says that before they die, because we have 2 kidneys and you only need one to live, I'm willing to give my second kidney to an individual. And that can happen 2 ways. It can happen through a person coming forward and donating to a stranger. So they'll go down that list again with that person and match them. Or it's someone who the person knows coming forward, and the 2 of them go into the process together and eventually end up with a kidney.
And what does the perfect donor look like, or a donor look like? Who would that person be?
Well, it'd be someone who's healthy. That's the most important thing. There's a long process to becoming a donor. There's lots of testing that's involved. So it's someone who is healthy, not just for obviously giving the kidney, but also for themselves, that they're not going to have any future health complications where they might require that organ themselves. That's a big piece of that. We don't want to create more problems down the road, obviously, in the healthcare system. And then I also think it's someone who understands the need that's out there. More often than not, the live donors coming forward, they have heard or they're aware of, or through connections in their family, they know of a story and a person who's had this issue or requires that organ. Very rarely will someone step forward just because they've heard about the donor program. They need a name and a face and a story that's attached to it in order to feel compelled to come forward and to donate. And I mean, that's just human nature. That's not really anything too out there. But we do know that just merely having a website, for example, that says you can live donate, it's not enough. It needs stories. It needs a face and a name attached to those stories for people to really feel that connection and feel drawn into it.
And how old should the person be? Is there an age limit on it? And
I'm not entirely sure. So that part I can't speak to too much. I do know that I've seen people donate up until their 40s and 50s, and as young as down into their, teens and 20s. So there's a broad range. I think what largely drives it is what's the state of your health. And again, not just for giving the kidney to somebody. Obviously, we want a healthy kidney to go into somebody. Or organ. There's liver as well as another organ that could be live donated, but also for the individual. They don't want to put undue stress onto you as a donor if they're going to start pulling organs out of you and putting you through surgery. So,
Eric, is the transplant done in Victoria, and what does it look like for the donor?
So the transplant's done in Vancouver. Vancouver General Hospital, but St. Paul's Hospital is the largest facility in the region that does the transplants. They have a wonderful team over there. And the procedure itself is much less invasive than what it's been in the past. So I was actually very fortunate. My brother had received a transplant a few years ago from my stepmother. This was done in London, Ontario, but it's the same kind of setup that they have. And she has an incision that's only a few inches wide, because they're able now to go in with tools and mechanized equipment to take that out. It used to be, and this is what still a lot of people think the procedures like, that you'd have a big slice across your backside. They'd have to break ribs in order to come in, and there was a significant recovery time after all that was done. It was amazing that people stepped forward even when the procedure was like that. Right. But certainly now with the reduction in the procedure. So, and watching my stepmother recover, it was about a month of serious recovery, what you'd expect from surgical recovery, and follow-ups with the hospital to make sure that everything was okay. And then it took her about 2 months just to get back on her feet and get everything going again. So about 3 months total is what it took her to really get back in the swing of things. And I mean, she's working. There's no impact on her life and her body after giving that kidney. She doesn't notice a difference. And even physiologically, her remaining kidney has grown to make up the difference of the lost kidney. So there's no impact in terms of how her body is functioning either.
Wow, it's remarkable, and a fantastic explanation of the process. And while you're right, it is surgery, it's certainly much less invasive than it once was. And you say the recovery is there. So your challenge right now, Eric, is getting the message out and saying that, hey, I'm here, I need a kidney, and it's going to change your life remarkably.
Yeah, so I've been passively looking for a kidney for the last 5 years. It's very difficult to initiate a conversation with someone asking for their organ. I mean, it's difficult to ask someone for a cup of coffee, let alone, can I have your kidney, right? Yeah. And a lot of my peers too had come from the military. So these are people who, you know, they're very healthy and fit, but we're not exactly, you might be putting yourself in an operational predicament by saying you're going to go through this surgery and do this. So I completely understand the reservation of a lot of individuals to come forward in my peer group on their own. The fact of the matter is that after 5 years of dialysis, it's starting to catch up to me. You know, I went into dialysis fit as a fiddle, and I remember my specialists and all the nurses saying, you're going to be just fine. You're going to handle dialysis fine because you have a great heart. You're physically fit. I mean, I was at the peak of my fitness in the military. That's worn down now. I've lost significant muscle mass over the last 5 years. And the battle with blood pressure in particular with me has led to me now being in stage 1 congestive heart failure. So it is starting to have an effect on organs in my body, and in a way that's irreversible. You know, you start messing with the heart, a heart transplant's much more significant and much less viable than a kidney transplant. So that was why I put out that post on Monday morning. It was an act of desperation after a few weeks that were rough as I went through these issues with my heart and the testing and confirming what had taken place. So, you know, and it opens with cards on the table, and that's really how I feel. This is where I'm at. I feel like I'm at the end of my line here in this 5-year run of dialysis, and I could really use an organ donor. And it was picked up by a local radio station and has caught fire since then. I've been just responding to messages. Some of them people telling me that they've called St. Paul's and they just want to let me know they're going to move forward with it. Some letting me know that they are live donors and to pass on the message that it's perfectly safe and good and they live a good life. I just had tremendous response from that. So it's been great.
Eric, unbelievable. Even your voice and watching your eyes and your sense of optimism for the future is fantastic. And I love your approach to life. Tell me what a donation would mean to you. How would that impact your life?
Well, the obvious one is that I wouldn't be going to dialysis anymore. So that would make a huge difference. I'm hoping to start a career working for BC Transit as a bus driver. We used to call ourselves glorified bus drivers in the Navy, so it fits perfectly with that. But I mean, they have a requirement. They run their services from 4 a.m. in the morning till 2 a.m. at night. And to say, well, I have to go to dialysis and I have to do these. Yeah, there's protections in place and I'm protected by my disability. But having that sense of service and duty as well that comes from the military, like I don't want to be that person that hinders my employers. I would like to just live a normal life and be able to commit to things and stick to them when I do commit to them. And I've found that very difficult over the last 5 years with my medical issues to be able to do that. And so that obviously is the big one. It's also just my health. So if I was able to get a kidney, you know, I do have the stage 1 congestive heart failure. That's obviously going to require now being more physically active, paying a little bit more attention to my health. Right now, I don't have the energy or the time sometimes to be physically active. It's just it's a side effect of having this illness. So a kidney would allow me to focus on that health issue without having to worry so much about the kidney issue that's on the side. Because I do know from my mother's experience that you live a regular life once you have that kidney transplant. You're able to travel without being tied to a dialysis unit. I really can't go. I can't even really go anywhere else in the country. It's a difficult process just to do dialysis in Ontario when I want to visit my family. So I would love to have that freedom back, to be able to travel and to be able to just live a life like everyone else does without thinking about it.
Wow.
Yeah. Giselle, and I'm very aware of the situation. My mom actually was on dialysis for 10 years. The travel piece, she lived in Nova Scotia. Just coming from Nova Scotia to St. John's was a Herculean task of organizing and lining up appointments and people you'd have to talk to. So I do understand, Eric, what it is you're saying there.
Eric, I have to tell you, we will certainly do our part to spread your story as far and wide as we possibly can. I'd love to get you back to that sense of adventure again, of sailing in through in San Francisco and just having that normality to life back would be wonderful for you. You have an awful lot to add to this world, my friend. You've done a great deal already. You've served our country. And we really appreciate that. And we'll do our very best to try to get this message out. And I'll leave the final words to you, Eric, of what you'd like to leave the audience with.
Yeah, so a really big piece of this is I've had a tremendous response to my request for a kidney donation. And I really do feel like this might be the moment when it's going to actually happen and come forward. And that's wonderful. And I'm very hopeful and excited. You mentioned that hope that's in my eyes. Well, if you would have talked to me a week ago, it would have been a little bit different. Part of that hope has been these messages that I'm hearing that's giving me that. What's important to remember, though, is I can only receive one kidney. And if 10 people come forward or 20 people come forward, I'm hoping that the other 19 continue on with that process, because you're hearing my story today. And like I said, people come forward when they're able to put a name and a face to a story. You could change my face and you can change my name. And there's 100 other stories in that dialysis unit that are just like mine. So I'm not the only person in need. I'm hoping that people see behind me that I'm just on the vanguard right now. I'm fortunate enough to have people who are willing to give me a platform to speak about this, but I'm really speaking for the dialysis community as a whole and saying that if you're considering right now, what is the best way I could help someone? What is something I can do today to really change and affect the life of somebody? You could be a live donor and you could initiate that. And it might not come to me, but it's going to come to someone who has a story exactly like me and would be just as grateful as I am, and you will impact their life just as much as I've explained here today to you. So I'm hoping that this increases awareness for those live donors. For me, there's really no reason why we should have a wait time for kidneys. Everybody has 2 kidneys. There's more than enough healthy people out there. If we could get to kidney zero across our country, where there just is not a wait time for people who require that organ, because there's a whole lineup of people saying, if you need it, I'm here to give it. It would just be wonderful. At this point, just a boost. If someone got some good news around this Christmas season that there's a kidney waiting for them next year, it would be fantastic. So I just want people to know that this is my story and it's great, and come forward certainly to donate. But remember my story and remember that there's many, many more people who are in need, and hopefully they carry on with that process and we get some kidneys into some people who need it.
Your sense of service before self has not been lost, my friend, and that is truly inspirational leadership that you're talking about there, Eric. We wish you all the best, and as we always say at the end of a GaleForceWins episode, and I mean this sincerely, the world needs more Eric James. Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to GaleForceWins. That's GaleForceWins, WINS.com.